Hello and welcome to New Filmmakers Los Angeles. I am delighted that we are stretching from LA to Indonesia with our multi-alumni award-winning filmmaker, Brian, who's with us live in Indonesia right now with his amazing film Sensor. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great, Danny. Thanks for having me on. I'm live all the way from Bali in Indonesia. We're working on a new project over here, so figured I'd say hi all the way from halfway across the world.
We're so grateful to have you, one of our amazing favorite filmmakers at the film festival. And I love that you scared me to death with this incredible snippet of a story in Sensor. And for those that haven't seen it, let's take a look at the clip. Thank you for being here, and but I've got so many questions to ask about your film. But for those that haven't seen it, tell us a brief synopsis.
Sure. Sensor is essentially a film about a veteran from Vietnam who is essentially suffering from PTSD. And, we talk about people from post-traumatic stress having ghosts from the past or traumatic experiences that have essentially given them a lot to think about and have tormented them for years. So we kind of took that premise and essentially made it into a story about what would actually happen if the ghosts of one's past were actually real. And we essentially have a little short film that encapsulates what happens when that confrontation goes hot and it goes live, and both sides basically don't want to back down.
It's a brilliant film to watch, and like I love that it's taken from this true story and kind of true story to the character and him trying to overcome certain fears. But within the mix of that, I mean, I was like, this looked even a scary film to even shoot. Like, you made these visuals that was just like mind blowing. Before we get into that, like where did you film it, by the way, Brian?
Yeah, finding a location was actually one of the more difficult challenges that we had on this particular production. We went all over the place looking for a location that would be not only wide and being able to have an expansive breadth in terms of the scope of it, so it felt like a larger world. So we went all the way to Joshua Tree, went all the way to Big Bear, and we eventually settled on this place in Hesperia, which is a little bit north of San Bernardino. It's kind of middle of nowhere, and we found this ranch that, whenever you message people online and you're telling them it's for a film, they automatically think, oh, it's a Hollywood production, it's going to be 10 grand a day. And so this lady was actually was nice enough to actually let us shoot here at this ranch for basically what they're normally charged for a short-term rental. So it was actually really nice of them. So yeah, it's Hesperia, middle of nowhere, not much filming happens in that area. So we're able to pull off a very unique look because it's kind of deserty, but not too deserty. It's somewhere in between. Yeah.
It felt a very unique look as well. And it was so great. Your lead actor, like I could just feel so much of like, what he was going through in his character and what he'd been through. Like, it was so magical to watch his performance. How do you go where did you go and find your cast?
Sure. I have huge props for Dana Lee, who essentially was the character. We felt it was important to cast real live veterans in the film because this is a veteran story. So Dana Lee, who plays Ken Jeong's father in his film, basically in the TV show for Sony, basically plays Ken Jeong's father, Dr. Ken, in the Dr. Ken TV show. He was actually a real life veteran for the United States Marine Corps for many years back in the day. And so he was able to draw from a lot of those experiences in his performance. And we essentially, how Hollywood is, I essentially know him through his daughter, Danielle, who was our production designer. So it's kind of the small world where we came up with the story together. And I asked Danielle, I was like, hey, do you mind asking your dad if he could be in it? And, Dana is very much a method guy who brought his A game to the table. And I think sprained his ankle at one point because he was so intense. And he, we had one night of shooting. That was essentially it. We only had 8 hours or something to pull this all off. And he was, it was cold. It got down to nearly freezing temperatures at night because it's sort of a arid climate. And he, pulled all the stops and pulled off an incredible performance, probably because he's channeling from what he learned as a veteran and a lot of his experiences and the way he moved and the way he acted. So it was incredible working with him, and I look forward to, working with him again in the future.
Oh, I love that he was a veteran because he was mesmerizing to watch, and you could really just feel like his history just playing out in his face and the way what he was giving us. It was actually almost chilling to kind of feel, because you almost just knew that he'd seen too much, and experienced too much. Well, I love that he kept it in his family and had the production design, that, because that was wonderful. Now, you mentioned that you filmed this at night, and I was already thinking, wow, that's an undertaking in itself, filming at nighttime. How was that experience for you?
Well, personally, this was actually one of the toughest shoots I've ever had to do, to be honest with you. Not necessarily because of the logistics or anything like that. That was a different kind of challenge, but I was actually sick the whole time I was there. Yeah. It was a pretty awful situation. This was we shot it in November, December last year. So this was pre-COVID, but I think I basically got an early onslaught of COVID because I had all the symptoms of COVID without actually knowing what COVID was at the time. I had a flu, a sore throat, stomach ache, mad cough, everything. Like, it was insane. Like, so much so that I literally, in between takes, I would have to go back to my room, and we were actually staying at the location too. I had to go back to my room and throw up and then go back on set and continue filming. It was so crazy. And we only had one night to capture everything. This wasn't a multi-day shoot. We went there over a 2-day period. Basically, we got there, we scouted it, and then that night we shot it, and then we went home the next day. So it was a pretty intense turnaround time. So that was me personally. I felt like it was a very tough experience, but the logistics were also quite challenging. We had these little aperture lights, the MC12s that we used.
Yes.
Aperture actually promised us. Yeah, they're cool little blinky lights that we use for the film. And so Aperture actually promised to let us use a demo model, but when they found out it was all the way in Hesperia, they're like, no, we're not going to drive there and let you guys borrow these. So we had to special order them from Asia, and they basically arrived like 2 days before the production. We weren't sure if we were going to get it, actually. And then using them, because they were like beta, like testing models, were very challenging because like they were basically controlled through an app, and that's how you saw the blinking effects. You could essentially choose. They're kind of like quasars. Yeah, you could actually choose what kind of color you want them, what the frequency of it was, but it all had to be manually done on this iPad. And because we were in the middle of nowhere, the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth weren't syncing, and that was a massive pain. So personally, I was medically sick, and the equipment was also technically sick, I guess. So it was a bit of a challenge to pull off. So it was probably one of the toughest shoots of my life from that standpoint.
Oh my goodness. Well, if anyone knows you, nothing keeps you down, it seems. Even when you're sick, you're still making a film. Like you're like a little superhero, filmmaking superhero, which doesn't surprise me at all. But
I don't know about that. I think I'm just stubborn.
Stubborn. Okay. Well, definitely work. But I love that. So, I mean, that's amazing, because those lights had such a poignant element to how the film looked. It was so powerful to watch. So I'm glad that, you went to such a conscious effort to bring those into the film, and it was so powerful to see it as part of it, and really, just had you on the edge of the seat with what you're bringing to us next. Now I know you kind of showed this like snippet of this life, and I love that this film, particularly at New Filmmakers, was part of our celebration of our veterans as well. And it was wonderful to speak to Andrea and tell him about his story as well, of his experience in the military. Was that kind of something that you kind of also kind of wanted to highlight, sort of these kind of stories, but in a sort of with a different angle and a different light? Because I know that you've got an affection to people that have served as well.
Yeah, I do. And I have worked for the military before in a civilian contracting capacity. So I've actually gotten to know a lot of veterans myself personally. And I think the film not only highlights an issue, which a lot of people in the veteran community face, which is PTSD, but also humanizes a lot of the struggle that they go through. I mean, obviously it's a personification of one's past demons, so to speak, but I think it tries to understand the struggle a little bit. And I can't even scratch the surface of what someone like who has actually gone through war has experienced, because I've not gone through that. So this was just my attempt to kind of create a bit of empathy, I guess, for the struggle that a lot of veterans go through, and be able to maybe understand and help the civilian population at least have a basic understanding, even if it's just in a superficial sort of way through this short film, at least understand the struggle and at least scratch the surface and and at least just start a conversation. On a personal level, at the time, I was actually I ended up actually applying for a Navy Reserve public affairs officer position at the time. I ended up not getting it, but it was something that it was a track that I personally was possibly going to be on at some point. So I think I also had an affinity for it, because that potentially could have been also my life path. Ended up not working out that way, but it was something that I definitely considered myself personally too. So that's why I kind of was very, fond of the story too.
Is there nothing you can't do? I feel like you apply your mind to do anything and you just make it happen. It's amazing. You amaze me. I love it.
I think there's almost too much I do, and sometimes it's tough getting my focus. I'm a little bit ADD like that.
No, I love it. Well, I love that again, I think you shone it's interesting enough because the way that we saw it as a viewer, firstly, we're taking into account, obviously, this was a veteran that had been through certain experiences, but it almost was the way you kind of shocked horrors was almost like as if we were experiencing a nightmare ourselves. It was very like symbolic in that way. And I felt it, and it almost made me start to imagine like, wow, if I'm feeling this now, imagine these were true experiences of my life, and how would I deal with that? Was that kind of something that you wanted us to kind of touch in there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a very good point. I think beyond just the story, it was that feeling of not knowing what would actually trigger your past traumas, where these demons have. I mean, all of us in many ways have those skeletons in our closets and those experiences that have colored us in many ways and given us, it shapes who we are, I guess. And in some ways, this trauma can sometimes leap out of nowhere. And so the nightmarish, ghoulish aspect of it was definitely something I was trying to highlight in terms of, not only relatability to veterans, but also all of us. I think all of us have these triggering experiences throughout all our lives. And because of our, everything we go through as human beings, I mean, ultimately life is, it's never smooth sailing. There's ups and downs and everything in between. So yeah, that nightmarish aspect was definitely something I was trying to capture and show on film, and even for a brief moment, because it's often more what you don't see that scares you.
Yes.
In many times, yeah, in Jaws, it's very much like you don't see the shark, but you're scared of going in the water because you think there might be a shark. So
Yeah.
we took a lot of attempts to not show the ghost too
Yeah.
much. Nikki Sue, who basically played the ghost, and she's a phenomenal actress that just did me a solid by showing up one night and acting in this production. But yeah, we tried to keep it as ambiguous and as subtle and sublime as possible, so we didn't overdo it. Because the thing you don't want to do in horror is just show the monster, so to speak, too
But
much.
that felt like the fact that you were giving us that I was feeling things that you hadn't even shown me, but it was just the feeling you were taking me there. So that it worked. It worked. It worked. Now it looks like you're in paradise right now, but you're actually shooting on your next film. And I usually say, what is next for you? Or you're live in the set. What's happening for you right now? What is next? What is going on?
Sure. Thanks to a very, very good friend and client of ours, we're here in Indonesia filming a commercial for the world's second largest paper supplier.
Wow.
It's like kind of a time-lapse project, kind of a commercial. So it's been a long-term project I've been working on. It's very, very different from my usual work. It's a commercial that is a lot about sustainability and the rainforest or reforestry and rainforest efforts here in Indonesia, which, as you know, is a tropical country. But beyond that, I'm also doing a small, like, little side project before we begin filming the commercial. It's actually another horror film, kind of a psychological thriller about a guy who basically goes to a massage parlor and bad stuff happens. Let's just say he does not get a happy ending.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah.
I always
Yeah.
love, I never know where I never know where you're gonna take us, but I always love where you do take us. It's always fun.
It's
No, it's brilliant. I'm so happy to be. Listen, you know, one of the things that I've enjoyed about getting to know you and in your career as well is that you just have this ability just to make things happen and you know, and despite all odds that you'll face. And I'm so it's so inspiring for our audience to kind of see, you know, you're out there doing it and finding ways and you know, putting your work out there. But I know you know you've got many pieces of advice you shared over the years. But is there sort of anything that you go by, particularly during these times, to sort of for other filmmakers that you can kind of just give some influence and aspiration to?
Sure. That's a good question. And just to be real with you and in our audience, I will say that I don't know if I'm necessarily the most artistic filmmaker. I'm not the second coming of whatever insert filmmaker you want here, Ridley Scott or Wes Anderson, any of those guys. I'm not an auteur, but if and when I do make it in this industry, it's because there's only one reason for it. It's resilience. And I think maybe a lot of audience people can relate to this because when the universe closes a door, you have two options. You can either say, I guess it wasn't meant to be, and then go back to doing whatever you were doing before, or you look at the door and then you decide, maybe I'll go through a window, maybe I'll climb through another area, or you break the door down. That's my philosophy in life. I never take no for an answer. And you know, I may not, maybe potentially, you know, if something's trying to be in your way, like right now, there's a freaking global pandemic going on, but I still found a way to get to Indonesia to do this film and shoot these commercials. And I know it seems tough for a lot of filmmakers out there. And for those of you that are listening and watching, a lot of stuff right now seems impossible. It seems daunting. It seems overwhelming. But when there's a will, there's a way. And I know that sounds so freaking cliche, and I hate that I said that, but honestly, never give up. And if it involves adjusting your script or adjusting your story or adjusting something to make it happen, still do it anyway. Because at the end of the day, even if your story may not be 100% of what it was, as long as it's still a good story with good characters and it's relatable and applicable to a lot of people, that's all that matters, you know? I think grit, resilience, and determination, and with a dash of stubbornness, in my case, I think will go far. Because there's those filmmakers who will go, you know what, it's not my perfect vision, forget it, I'm not gonna make it. I'm not one of those filmmakers. I go, okay, maybe it's not exactly what I wanted to do, but I can still do what I do best and adapt and be resilient. You know, it's the only constant in life is change. And if you keep changing with it, you'll be able to roll with the punches and actually still pull off your film. So I would say that's my piece of advice is be as resilient and as gritty as you can. And if the universe closes the door, you know, destroy the door, walk through it.
Oh, I love it. Listen, talk about inspiration. You just giving us battery full life where we all feel better in our lives now. And it's so great. And you are a man of your example because you're actually doing it, you know, right this very second and making a way. And that is wonderful. And I'm just so grateful that we have you just making great films for us. And we appreciate you and thank you for Censor and best wishes with this project and also your own projects as well. And we're very thankful, and big virtual hug from LA to Indonesia. So
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a pleasure as always.